The card reader beeped a third time. Declined. Caroline Hayes stood at the counter of a crowded little diner, 40 people watching her phone dead in her pocket, and her real wallet sitting on a pharmacy counter 10 miles away. Someone near the window lifted a camera. She reached for her coat, ready to leave without a word. Then a man in grease-stained work clothes stepped past her and laid exact change on the counter. $12.40. He said 6 words, took his son's takeout box, and walked out into the rain without asking her name. He had no idea who she was. He had just changed his own life. The pharmacy on Delaney Street kept its lights on until 8, and on the first Tuesday in September, at 6:15, Caroline Hayes was standing in line behind a woman who was counting dollar bills the way people count when they already know the answer. The woman's name was Rosa Delgado, though Caroline wouldn't learn that for another 4 months. What Caroline saw was a gray cardigan, a canvas shopping bag, and a small stack of prescription boxes on the counter that the pharmacist was quietly setting aside one by one as the total came down. Rosa didn't argue. She just nodded at each box, like she was choosing which of her own organs to keep. Caroline stepped forward and put her card down on the counter without ceremony. "All of them," she said to the pharmacist. "Ring them all." Rosa turned. She started to say something, and Caroline had already learned over many years and many counters that the only way to do this cleanly was to not be there when the thank you arrived. She signed, she pulled her coat closed, and she was out the door and into the parking lot before the older woman could get past the first syllable. Her assistant had the car running. She had a meeting downtown at 7 that would decide whether a company in Ohio kept 412 people employed, and she was already 20 minutes behind. Behind her on the pharmacy counter sat a slim black wallet she had set down to dig out the card and never picked back up. Rosa Delgado saw it first. She looked at the door. She looked at the wallet. Then she put it in her canvas bag, very carefully, the way you carry something that belongs to someone who is going to come back for it. The meeting ran 3 hours. Caroline Hayes had built her company on the principle that a room full of tired people will eventually tell you the truth, and so she outlasted them, and a little after 10 o'clock, she had what she wanted. Somewhere in the second hour, her phone had gone from 12% to 4 to a black rectangle in her hand. The battery pack was in her wallet. Her wallet was in a pharmacy on Delaney Street, and she did not yet know that. She noticed the hunger only when she stood up. It was raining when she came out, the thin, persistent kind that doesn't fall so much as hang. She told her driver to go home. She wanted 20 minutes of being nobody, which was a thing she had to schedule now, like a dentist appointment. 4 blocks east, there was a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Ruth's Corner, and it was the only place on the street still lit. Benjamin Brooks had been under a house since 2 in the afternoon. The job was a rewire in a 1950s split level where somebody in the 70s had run aluminum where copper should have gone, and he had spent 8 hours on his back in a crawl space correcting a stranger's shortcut. He came up out of it at 10, and then there was the part nobody pays for, hauling the spool and the drill and the fish tape back out to the truck in the rain, writing the invoice on the tailgate, walking the homeowner through what he'd found so the man would understand why the number was the number. It was 20 to 11 when he pulled up outside Ruth's, and he still had the late shift at the warehouse on Friday and Saturday, and his son had eaten cereal for dinner 2 nights running. So he stopped for a chicken plate to go. He was 38. His wife had been gone 4 years, which was long enough that people had stopped mentioning her, and not nearly long enough for anything else. He had an 8-year-old at home named Ethan, who was at that moment being watched by the neighbor across the hall and was almost certainly not in bed. Benjamin stood at the register waiting on the takeout box and thought about nothing at all, which was the closest thing to rest he got. Caroline had come through the door 20 minutes earlier, shaking rain off her sleeves. The place was full. Ruth's ran a night crowd, hospital shifts, road crews, 2 cops in a corner booth, maybe 40 people packed into a room built for 30. Caroline ate a bowl of soup and a grilled cheese at the counter and felt for the length of that meal entirely ordinary. Then the check came. She reached for the wallet and her hand closed on the lining of her coat pocket. She checked the other pocket. She checked her bag. Somewhere between the pharmacy and the parking lot, her whole life had come loose, and now she stood there running the afternoon backward in her head until she found the exact moment, the counter, the card in her hand, the door. She thought about borrowing a phone. Then she understood that she did not know a single number by heart. Not her driver's, not her assistant's. They lived in a device that was currently a black rectangle in her pocket, and she had not memorized a phone number since she was in college. There was one thing left, a backup card she had carried in the inside pocket of that coat for years, for emergencies, the kind of card you forget you own. Dana, the girl at the register, ran it. The reader beeped and the little screen said declined, and Dana said it happened sometimes with the strip, and ran it again. Declined. Caroline felt the temperature of the room change. Not the sound. The sound stayed exactly the same. Forks and rain, and a man laughing at the far end. But the attention. She had spent 6 years learning to feel a room turn toward her, and it turned now. The reader beeped a third time. The date printed on the card had passed the month before. She had not looked at it in 3 years. There was no reason she ever would have. "I can come back in the morning," Caroline said. Her voice sounded very steady and very far away. "I'll leave my name." Near the window, somebody lifted a phone and held it up at chest height, the way people do when they think they're being subtle. She reached for her coat, and a man in grease-stained work clothes stepped past her and laid money on the counter. Not a card. Cash at 10 2 ones and change counted out of his palm, exact $12.40. He didn't look at her while he did it. He looked at the register. Then he looked up once and said, "Let me get that for you." 6 words. No pity in them. He might have been telling her the time. Caroline opened her mouth, and Dana was already handing him a paper bag with a takeout box in it. And he took it and said something to the cook about Thursday, and then he was out the door into the rain with the bag held against his chest to keep it dry. The whole thing took 11 seconds. Caroline stood at the counter of a diner she had never been in before, holding a receipt Dana had torn off and handed her out of habit. $12.40. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded it in half, and in half again, and put it in the pocket where her wallet should have been. She did not sleep. She lay in an apartment with a view of 2 rivers, and she thought about the fact that a man who could not afford to had just paid for her dinner, and that he had not asked her name, and that he had walked out before she could give it. It was not the $12. Caroline Hayes had given away so far that year a little over $9 million. She had done it the way she did everything through the foundation, through wire transfers, through a name on a form that was never her own. She was good at giving. She had made an art of it. What she had not done, not once in 3 years, was receive anything from anyone. There was a reason for that, and she knew exactly what it was. His name had been Daniel, and they had been 5 weeks from a wedding when her attorneys put the prenuptial agreement on the table. She had watched his face while he read it, and she had understood in about 40 seconds that the thing he loved had a $sign in front of it. He didn't even fight. He negotiated. That was the part she couldn't get past. He negotiated calmly, line by line, and she sat there and realized she had been an entry on a schedule to him the entire time. After that, she had built a very simple rule, though she had never said it out loud. She would be the one who gave. Always. Give enough and fast enough and quietly enough, and you never owe anyone anything, and nobody ever gets the chance to price you. And then a stranger in dirty work clothes had put $12.40 on a counter for a woman he had never seen before, and walked out into the rain and had gotten absolutely nothing for it. He hadn't known who she was. That was the whole thing. That was the part that kept her awake until the sky went gray over the river. For the first time in longer than she wanted to count, somebody had given her something without any idea what she was worth. She went back 4 times over the following week. She wore jeans and a plain coat, and she sat at the counter from 8 until 10, and 3 times he did not come. Dana started nodding at her. The cook started leaving the soup on longer. On the 3rd visit, Dana Ruth's granddaughter, it turned out, which explained the sign, asked if she was waiting for somebody, and Caroline said yes, and did not elaborate. On the 4th visit, a Wednesday at 9:20, the door opened, and he came in with dirt on his collar. He didn't recognize her at first. She watched him not recognize her, and she understood something about the size of his week. "You paid for my dinner," Caroline said. Benjamin looked at her properly then. Recognition arrived slowly and brought embarrassment with it, which was not the reaction she had expected. "It wasn't a lot," he said. "It was everything you had in your hand." He didn't answer that. He shifted the weight on his boots and said the cook was already making his order, and Caroline, who had negotiated with governments, could not think of a single natural thing to say next. So she said, "Can I buy you a coffee? I have actual money tonight." Something in his face gave not much a hairline crack. He sat down 2 stools over, which was as close as he was willing to get, and he told her his name was Benjamin. "Carrie," she said. It came out before she had decided anything. Her mother had called her that until she was 9 years old, and nobody had used it since, and it was not exactly a lie. She told him she worked at a software company, which was also not exactly a lie, and she heard herself say it and felt the shape of the thing she was building. She could have fixed it right there. 1 sentence. She didn't. He came back the following Tuesday and took the same stool 2 over from hers, and Caroline understood that 2 stools was going to be the arrangement for a while. It was that second night before she knew almost anything about him that he told her about the library. He had come from a parent-teacher conference, and he was still turning it over. His son's teacher had said the boy was reading 2 grades up and had asked what he had at home, and Benjamin had not known how to explain that what they had at home was a shelf and a half. "They've got a library at the school," he said. I use the word loosely. Caroline waited. "Roof's been leaking since before he started there. They put buckets out. Half the shelves are gone because the books went moldy, and they had to pull them, and nobody replaced them. So now there's, I don't know, 100 books, maybe 110, for 400 kids." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn. "He's read all of them, 3 times. He's read them 3 times, and he doesn't complain about it, which is the part that gets me. He just goes and gets the same one again." The rain had stopped outside. Someone at the far end of the counter was arguing about a football game. "What's the school called?" Caroline said. Benjamin told her. "Bellwood Elementary over on 9th. He said it the way you say something to a person who is making conversation, and then he asked her about her week, and she gave him an answer that was 90% true, and left out the only part that mattered. She wrote nothing down. She did not need to. It took most of a month to close the gap from 2 stools to 1. She learned him in pieces, and only the pieces he offered. That he had grown up 90 minutes north and come down for a job that no longer existed. That he had been licensed at 23 and had worked for a contractor for 12 years before going out on his own, which he described as the best decision he ever made, and then immediately described as a mistake in the same breath without appearing to notice. That he drove a white pickup with 190,000 miles on it and a toolbox in the bed that was worth more than the truck. That there had been a wife. He gave her that in the first week of October sideways. While stirring coffee, he wasn't drinking. Her name had been Grace. She had been sick for 14 months, and then she had not been anything. And he had learned in those 14 months that a hospital will save your life and take everything else you own as payment, and that there is no version of the accounting where you get to be angry about it, because they did save her for a while, and you cannot send back the while. "So I'm still paying," Benjamin said. "It's fine. It's just a number that gets smaller." Caroline, who could have made the number stop existing before her soup got cold, said nothing at all. That was the first time she felt it. The thing that would sit in her chest for the next 2 months and grow. The sentence was right there. "I can fix this." She had said it 1,000 times in 6 years to boards, and to strangers, and to her own foundation officers, and she had never once had to choke on it. She choked on it because Carrie from a software company could not say it, and because she had started to understand something else the second she said it. He would become a person who had been helped by her. And every single person in her life was already that. He worked 2 jobs because one didn't cover it. Days he ran his own calls panels, rewires a lot of old houses in the neighborhoods east of Delaney, where the wiring predated the appliances people were plugging into it. Friday and Saturday nights, he loaded trucks at a distribution warehouse from 11 until 7 in the morning, and slept Sunday, and was at church with his son at 5 in the evening, because that was the late service, and it was the only one he could stay awake through. And there was Ethan. There was always Ethan in every 4th sentence, the way a river shows up in every photograph of a town built on one. The boy was 8. He had been born with almost no hearing in his left ear, which Benjamin mentioned the same way he mentioned the truck's mileage a fact load-bearing, not tragic. He wore an aid that had been fitted at 5 and was now too small, held together at the ear hook with a wrap of electrical tape because his father was an electrician, and that was the tape they had. He brought Ethan on a Thursday in the 3rd week of October, because the neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Pruitt, had a doctor's appointment of her own, and there was nowhere else to put him. Caroline had spent 6 years being introduced to children. They were walked up to her at galas by parents who had already explained who she was, and they shook her hand and said the thing they had been coached to say, and looked at her like a monument. Ethan Brooks came through the door of Ruth's corner, climbed onto the stool beside her without asking anyone, looked at her and said, "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I don't know," Caroline said. "Nobody's asked me in a long time." That was apparently the correct answer, or possibly any answer would have been. What followed was 8 minutes of uninterrupted testimony on the subject of the Cretaceous period, delivered slightly too loudly, and with his head turned a few degrees so his right ear led, which she noticed and did not remark on. He explained that most of what she thought she knew about a Tyrannosaurus rex was outdated. He explained feathers. He was appalled personally, and, on behalf of science, by a movie he had seen. Benjamin sat on the far side of him, with the expression of a man watching weather come in and knowing there's nothing to be done about it. "Bud," he said finally, "let her eat." "She can eat," Ethan said. "I'm not stopping her." And Caroline laughed, actually laughed from somewhere under the sternum, the kind that surprises you, and Benjamin looked over at her, and something in his face changed and stayed changed. She thought about it for a long time afterward. The boy had talked to her for 8 minutes and had wanted exactly nothing. He didn't know what she was worth. He didn't know she was worth anything. He had simply decided she was a person who might be interested in dinosaurs, and had proceeded on that basis. It was, she thought, the most flattering conversation she had ever had. Benjamin took his son home that night and put him in bed and sat in the kitchen with the light off. He was aware of what was happening to him. He was 38, not 15, and he could name it. He liked the way she listened. He liked that she never once looked at his hands, which were always dirty in the creases no matter what he did and which people did look at. He also had a payment schedule taped inside a cabinet door, and a truck with 190,000 miles on it, and a son with tape on his hearing aid. A man in his position did not get to have thoughts like that about a woman. That was the arithmetic, and Benjamin had been doing it for 4 years, and he had never once found a way to make it come out different. Bellwood Elementary's library had been closed since the previous spring. In the last week of September, there had been men on the roof and a dumpster in the side lot, and a rumor that ran the length of the parent pickup line for 6 weeks, and was finally confirmed by a letter that went home in every backpack in the building at the end of October. An anonymous donor had funded a complete rebuild, structure shelving 7,000 volumes, a bank of computers, and an endowment for a full-time librarian, a position the school had not had since the year Ethan was born. 7 weeks start to finish. The dedication was the first Friday in November. Parents welcome. Benjamin traded a call and went. He sat in the third row of folding chairs in a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and wet coats, with Ethan somewhere in the front block with the other third graders. And he watched Principal Whitaker work through the thank yous with the particular joy of a woman who has been asking for something for 9 years and has finally gotten it. "Our donor asked at the beginning to remain anonymous," Whitaker said. "I'm delighted to tell you she has changed her mind." Benjamin was thinking about a service panel he had to replace that afternoon. "Please welcome the founder of Hayes Systems, Caroline Hayes." She came out from the side of the stage in a gray coat he had never seen, and the gymnasium stood up, and Benjamin Brooks did not stand up because his legs had stopped receiving instructions. There was a brass plaque on an easel beside the podium. He could read it from the third row. He read it 4 or 5 times without any of it going in. She was good at the podium. That was the detail that undid him. She was practiced. This was a thing she did. She thanked the district and the contractors and the librarian they'd hired. And she was warm and brief, and she did not read from anything. And every person in that gymnasium was looking at her, the way you look at weather you're grateful for. "I want to tell you where this started," Caroline said, "because it wasn't in a boardroom. About 2 months ago, I was sitting at a counter in a diner near here talking to a father from this neighborhood. He wasn't asking me for anything. He didn't know who I was. He was telling me about his son, who reads everything he can get his hands on, and who had read every single book in this building 3 times, and who never once complained about it." She looked out over the folding chairs. "He'll never know he did this. I'm not going to embarrass him by saying his name. I just want the parents in this room to understand that the entire reason there are 7,000 books behind that door is that a man who works 2 jobs was proud of his kid out loud in front of a stranger on a Tuesday night." The gymnasium came apart with applause. Benjamin sat in the middle of it and understood in sequence 3 things. She was Caroline Hayes. She had been Caroline Hayes the entire time at the counter in the plain coat asking about his week. She had built this because of him. Every book behind that door existed because he had run his mouth about his son over a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. And the third thing arrived last, and hurt most. He had been seen. He had sat there for 2 months and been honest about the leaking roof and the hospital debt and the tape on his son's hearing aid, and the whole time he had been talking to a woman who could have written a check for any of it without looking, and who had listened to him the way you listen to a man describing a flood he's standing in. He had thought he was talking to someone. He had been reporting a condition. Benjamin stood up during the applause, which was the only cover he was going to get, and walked out through the side doors into the parking lot and sat in his truck for a while without starting it. She came looking for him. He didn't go to Ruth's that week or the week after, and on the 9th day, Caroline had her driver take her east of Delaney to an address she had gotten the only honest way available, which was by asking Dana at the register whether Benjamin Brooks had been in. He came down to the parking lot because he wasn't going to have the conversation in front of his son. "I should have told you the first night," Caroline said. "Which first night?" Benjamin said. "There were a few." She took that. "I liked being nobody," she said. "I've been trying to explain it to myself for 2 weeks, and that's the closest I can get. You put $12.40 on a counter for me, and you didn't know my name, and I have not been a person to anybody in 3 years. I wanted more of it. So I lied, and then I kept lying, because every day I didn't fix it, it got more expensive to fix." Benjamin stood with his arms folded and the cold coming through his shirt. "I'm not angry that you're rich," he said, and he meant it, and it was almost true. "I'm angry that I told you about the roof and you already had a contractor." "I didn't already have a contractor. I hired one because of what you said." "That's worse." She didn't understand, and he could see she didn't. And he didn't have the words to get it across the gap between them, that a man tells you about a leak and you hand him a building. And now for the rest of his life, he is a man who was handed a building. He said he had to get back upstairs. She said all right. Neither of them moved for a moment, and then she got in the car. Ethan failed the hearing screening at school in the 3rd week of November. Benjamin assumed a mistake because the left ear had always been the bad one, and everybody knew that. The audiologist ran the full battery over 2 visits, and then Dr. Hollis sat down across from him in a small office with a poster of the inner ear on the wall and used the phrase progressive bilateral sensorineural loss, and then seeing Benjamin's face used ordinary words instead. The right ear was going. It had been going for a while quietly, which was why the boy tilted at his head and why he'd started reading lips without anyone teaching him. An aide would not hold it. What would hold it was a cochlear implant, and the window that mattered was the next 3 months, because at 8 years old, the difference between an implant now and an implant at 11 was the difference between a kid who talks like his friends and a kid who doesn't. Benjamin asked what it cost. The insurance he carried covered 40%. The number left on the page after everything was $31,000. He drove home. He made spaghetti. He listened to his son explain that the sound a Parasaurolophus made had probably been very low, like a tuba. And he said, "Huh, a tuba at the right intervals." And when Ethan was asleep, he went down and sat in the cab of the truck in the lot behind the building and ran the numbers 7 separate ways. There was no way. There was overtime, and there was the truck, and there was a second mortgage on an apartment he rented, which is to say, there was nothing. She found out because Mrs. Pruitt told Dana at Ruth's, and Donna told her, and Caroline was in the parking lot east of Delaney the following evening. They walked because Benjamin wouldn't sit down. "I'll cover it," Caroline said. "All of it. Not alone. Today. He can be scheduled before Christmas." "No." "Benjamin." "No." He stopped walking. "Thank you, I mean that. No." She had prepared for hesitation. She had not prepared for a wall. "Help me understand," she said. "You want to know what $31,000 is to me?" Benjamin said. "It's 11 months of everything I make before I eat. You want to know what it is to you." He looked at the black car idling at the end of the block. "It's not anything. It's not even a decision. You'd sign it the way I sign for a package. So there's no version of that where we're the same after." "We were never the same," Caroline said. "That's not a thing that can be protected. It's just true, and it was true when you paid for my dinner and you did it anyway. That was $12. It was everything in your hand. I told you that the first night and I meant it, and you're not allowed to reprice it now, because the number's bigger." They were on a sidewalk in the cold. 2 people who had never raised their voices at each other, and neither of them raised one now, which somehow made it worse. "You know what happens," Benjamin said. "Not to you. To me. I take that money, and every conversation we have after it, I'm sitting on one side of a table with a debt on it. I'll hear it. Every time you're nice to me, I'll wonder if it's the money being nice. And in 2 years, I'll look at my kid, who can hear who's fine, who's great, and I'll know I'm the guy who couldn't do it." "He's 8 years old," Caroline said. "Your pride is not worth his hearing." It came out harder than she meant, and she watched it land. "Say that to me again," Benjamin said quietly. She didn't. She reached into her coat pocket for her phone to call the car, to do anything with her hands, and something came out with it. A small square of paper folded twice, gone soft at the creases, worn white along the folds the way paper gets when it's been carried a long time. It fell on the sidewalk between them. Benjamin bent and picked it up and handed it back without turning it over. He assumed a receipt, A note something of hers. Caroline took it and closed her hand around it and put it back in her pocket and did not explain, because she could not possibly have explained it, standing on that sidewalk. "I'm going to go up," Benjamin said. "He'll be waiting on me." The photograph went up on the first Sunday in December. Someone at Ruth's had taken it back in October. The two of them at the counter, one stool apart, her laughing at something, him in a work shirt with his name on the pocket. It surfaced attached to a piece about Caroline Hayes and the Bellwood Library, and then it detached from the piece and went where those things go. The captions wrote themselves. People who had never been within 900 miles of Delaney Street explained to each other what they were looking at. A man in dirty clothes sitting next to a woman worth what she was worth. There was a word for that, and the internet found it inside an hour. It was in the parent group by Monday. It was in the 3rd grade by Tuesday. Ethan came home on Wednesday and put his backpack down and did not say anything about dinosaurs. Tyler Whitcomb says, "Carrie is rich," he said. Benjamin at the stove said that she was. He said, "You're friends with her for the money." Tyler Whitcomb's 9. His son stood in the kitchen doorway working something out, and Benjamin turned the burner down and waited. And when it came flat and reasonable, which was the worst way it could have come. "Is she going to pay for my ear?" Benjamin said no. Ethan considered this. He was not upset. He was doing the same arithmetic his father had done a dozen times at that table, with a child's information and a child's directness, and he arrived at the only question available. Why not? Benjamin Brooks stood in his kitchen with a wooden spoon in his hand and could not produce a single word, because the honest answer had nothing to do with Caroline Hayes. The honest answer was because of me, and you do not say that to an 8-year-old, and you cannot say anything else to him either, because he will know. He said dinner was almost ready. Ethan said okay, and went to wash his hands, and that was the end of it. And Benjamin did not sleep that night either. Marcus Reyes had run Caroline's office for 6 years. He had joined a year after the company's first real funding round, and he had been there for Daniel for the prenuptial agreement for the 4 days afterward, when she did not come in. He had opinions about that period, which he had never expressed and had never stopped holding. So when the photograph surfaced, Marcus did what he considered his job. He engaged a firm. He asked for the standard package on Benjamin Brooks of Delaney Street, the electrical license, the LLC filing the medical debt, the collections history, the 4 years of tax returns, the deceased wife, the son's medical file where it was reachable. He did not tell Caroline because the entire value of the exercise was that she wouldn't have to know it happened. She found the invoice on a Thursday in the middle of December. What she said to him took under 4 minutes, and she never once raised her voice. She told him she understood he thought he was protecting her. She told him that what he had actually done was take a man who had given her something for free and put a price on him in a file to be reviewed. She told him that was the single thing she could not have in her life, and that it had been sitting in her office for 6 years. Marcus cleared his desk that afternoon, but an investigator had already made calls. He had called Benjamin's old contractor. He had called the property manager. He had called, and this was the one that traveled the billing office at the hospital where Grace Brooks had died, asking to confirm an outstanding balance. The property manager mentioned it to Benjamin in the stairwell, conversationally, the way you mention weather. "Somebody's been asking about you." Benjamin stood in that stairwell with his toolbox in his hand and felt something in his chest close like a valve. He did not know Marcus Reyes existed. He did not know about a 4-minute conversation on a Thursday or a desk cleared that afternoon. He knew only what a man in his position could know, that somewhere in a building he would never enter, he had been looked into, vetted, priced. He had been right the whole time. That was the worst part of it. He had said there's no version of that where we're the same after, and he had been standing on a sidewalk saying it while somebody in her world was already pulling his wife's hospital bill. Not a person. A risk. He stopped answering. Caroline called twice in the first week, and once in the second, and left one message which was 6 sentences long and did not mention money. He listened to all of it, and did not call back. He picked up 2 more nights at the warehouse, which made 4, which meant Mrs. Pruitt 3 evenings a week, and Ethan asleep before he got home most nights. He borrowed $9,000 against a signature at a rate he understood perfectly well, and signed anyway. He sold the tools he could work without. And 2 days after Christmas, he drove the white pickup to a lot on the highway and signed the papers on it, 191,000 miles, and got a number that was not close to enough, and took the bus home. You cannot run electrical calls without a truck. He knew that when he signed. It was not a plan. It was a man throwing furniture into a fire to keep a room warm for 1 more hour. And Caroline Hayes, 40 minutes away, did nothing. She wanted to do everything. She had the routing number for the hospital's billing department, and the name of the surgeon, and the ability to end the entire situation, with a phone call placed from a car, and she understood for the first time in her adult life, actually understood, that doing it would be for her. So she let him go. She had never let anyone go before. She had always paid instead. What she kept doing, she did the way she had always done it. In the weeks that followed, Bellwood got a hot lunch program funded through a trust with a name on it that meant nothing to anyone. The roof over the West Wing got sealed. 9 scholarship accounts opened at the district level for kids whose families met a threshold, and one of those kids was Ethan Brooks, and the paperwork that went home did not have her name anywhere on it. She never mentioned the $31,000 again, not once. She did not offer it as a bridge, or a loan, or a favor, or a way back. Rosa Delgado had been carrying a wallet in her canvas bag since the first week of September. She had gone back to the pharmacy on Delaney twice a week for 4 months asking. She described the woman to everyone, dark coat in a hurry, paid for all of it, and left before I could say anything. Nobody knew. She had opened the wallet exactly once to look at the license, and had put it back, and never opened it again. What finally found Caroline Hayes for her was the photograph. Her grandson had it on his phone in the 2nd week of January, and he showed it to her, the way you show your grandmother a thing everyone is talking about. And Rosa Delgado looked at a laughing woman in a diner and said out loud in her kitchen, "That's her." The picture had a name under it. It also had a room in it, a counter, a hand-painted board behind the register, a window. Rosa had lived east of Delaney for 31 years, and she knew exactly which room that was. So she went to Ruth's Corner on a Tuesday and described the woman to Dana at the register. Dana knew exactly who she meant. Dana also knew the woman had not been in for a month, and that the man beside her in the photograph, the one the internet had made up its mind about, had been in once and had looked terrible. Which is how Benjamin came down to the lobby of his building on a Saturday in January to meet a small woman in a gray cardigan holding a wallet. "I'm looking for her," Rosa said. "The girl at the diner says you know her." He looked at the wallet. He looked at the driver's license through the plastic window, Hayes Caroline, and he thought about how long a person would have to carry something before they gave up, and how this woman clearly had not considered giving up as an option. "You could have used what's in there," Benjamin said. It came out flatter than he meant. Rosa looked at him like he had said something in a language she didn't speak. "It's not mine," she said. She sat down on the bench by the mailboxes without being invited, because she was 71, and had been standing for a while, and she told him about a Tuesday in September, about the pharmacist quietly taking boxes off the counter one at a time, about the blood pressure medication she was going to keep, and the 2 she was going to let go, and the woman behind her in line saying all of them, ring them all, and being out the door before Rosa could turn around. "I wanted to thank her for 4 months, Rosa said. "That's it. That's the whole thing I wanted." And then she said the rest of it, because 31 years in a neighborhood gives a person a lot to list. The winter coat drive at the parish that had been going since 2019, which the priest said came from a foundation nobody could ever get on the phone. The 3 families on Corliss whose rent got covered the year the plant closed. The clinic on 9th that stayed open when it should not have stayed open. The van. The summer meals. None of it had a name on it. Rosa had assumed for 6 years that it was a church somewhere. Benjamin sat down on the bench next to her with the wallet in his hands. 6 years of it. 6 years of a woman doing exactly what she had done for his son's school quietly, without her name, without ever once standing where the thank you could reach her, and he had stood on a sidewalk and told her that her money would ruin him. And then he had disappeared, and she had let him, because she respected him enough to let him. She had never once used it against him. Not the 31,000. Not any of it. She had every possible piece of leverage a human being can have over another, and she had put none of it on the table, and he had walked away anyway. He had spent 4 months defending his dignity from a woman who had never made one single move against it. The wall between them was not her money. He had built the wall. He had built it out of the only material he had left, which was pride, and he had done such a good job that his son was going to lose his hearing behind it. Benjamin took the bus, which covered in 50 minutes what the truck had covered in 20, and he brought his son with him because he was not going to do this, and then come home and explain it. Secondhand. Ruth's corner at 4 in the afternoon was almost empty. He put Ethan in a booth with a paper placemat and a chicken plate, and asked Dana at the register if she still had a way to reach the woman who used to sit at the counter. Dana said she had a number a driver had left her once in case of anything. "Tell her I'm here," Benjamin said. "Tell her I'll wait as long as it takes." It took an hour and 10 minutes. There was no stage. There was no microphone and no gymnasium and no brass plaque on an easel. There was a counter with 11 stools, a rain-streaked window, a cook listening to a radio in the back, and an 8-year-old in the corner booth working through a plate of chicken with the total absorption of a man doing his job. Caroline came through the door shaking rain off her sleeves the same as the first night, and stopped when she saw him. He was on the same stool. She took the one too over, because that was where they had started, and then, after a moment, moved to the one beside it. Benjamin put the wallet on the counter between them. He told her about a small woman in a gray cardigan who had carried it in a canvas bag for 4 months and had gone back to that pharmacy twice a week asking after a stranger, and who had finally found her in the same photograph the whole city had spent December being ugly about. He told her what Rosa Delgado had listed for him on a bench by the mailboxes, the coats, the rent on Corliss, the clinic on 9th, that should have closed in 2022, and didn't the summer meals, the van. 6 years of it with a church's name on the paperwork, and never once her own. Caroline looked at the wallet and did not touch it. "I never minded that you were rich," Benjamin said. "I want you to hear that because I know it's what you think, and it isn't true. I've been poor my whole life. I'm used to it. It's not a wound." He turned his hands over on the counter, the creases still dark no matter what he did. "What I couldn't stand was the idea that one day you'd look at me and see an unpaid bill. That's all. Grace was sick for 14 months, and I have sat in a lot of rooms where a person looks at me and adds me up, and I got so good at seeing it coming that I saw it on you before you ever did it. You never did it. I want that on the record. You never once did it, and I treated you like you had." The radio in the back changed songs. Caroline reached into her coat pocket and took out a small square of paper, folded twice, gone soft and white along the creases, and set it on the counter between them. Benjamin recognized it. He had picked it up off a sidewalk in November and handed it back without turning it over. He turned it over now. The ink had faded, but it was still legible. 1 bowl of soup, 1 grilled cheese, $12.40. "I've carried it since that night," Caroline said. He didn't say anything, so she kept going. "There was a man I was going to marry. 3 years ago, my attorneys put an agreement in front of him, and I watched him read it, and he didn't get angry, he negotiated. line by line, very calm, and I sat there and understood that I had been a number to him the whole time, and I never got over it. And what I did instead of getting over it was make a rule. She turned the receipt a quarter turn on the counter, the way he turned coffee cups. I would always be the one who gave. Always. Give enough, fast enough, quietly enough, and you never owe anybody anything, and nobody ever gets to price you. I've given away $9 million since January, and in 6 years, not one person has been allowed to give me anything back, because not one of them was ever allowed to know my face. Benjamin looked at the square of paper. And then you put $12.40 on this counter for a woman you'd never seen, and you didn't know my name, and you got nothing for it, and you left before I could even thank you. Her voice stayed level. That's the thing I needed. Not somebody worthy of me. Somebody who gave me something when I had nothing to give back. In 6 years, you're the only one. Ethan Brooks had finished his chicken and had been listening for a while in the way of a child who is not supposed to be listening, and who has spent his whole life reading faces because he cannot always get the words. He came over and stood at his father's elbow with his head turned a few degrees so his right ear led. "Are you guys still fighting?" Benjamin said they weren't exactly. His son considered this and found it insufficient. He looked from one of them to the other, at 2 adults who had spent 4 months constructing an architecture of pride and guilt and hospital debt, and he asked the only question that had ever been in the room. "Then can we just have dinner, all of us? Like at the same time?" Nobody answered him. "I don't get why that's hard," Ethan said. Benjamin sat with that for a long moment. Then he asked Dana for a pen, and he asked Caroline for something to write on, and she gave him the back of an envelope out of her bag. "I'll take the help," he said, "not as a gift." She waited. There are 40 kids in this district in some version of this. Hearing vision insulin wheelchairs. I've been in 100 of those houses. I know what's in them. "You put up money. Not for my kid. For a fund. And I run it." Caroline asked what he meant by run it. "I mean, I do the work. I sit with the families, I do the applications, I fight the insurance companies, I show up at the hospital when nobody else will. I've done it 4 times for myself, I'm good at it, and it's the only thing in the world I know how to do that you can't hire." He wrote 3 lines on the envelope and turned it toward her. "Ethan's the first grant. He gets reviewed like everybody else, and I don't sit on the vote." He put the pen down. "I'm not taking money from you. I'm going to work for it. That's the deal, or there's no deal." Caroline Hayes had been across the table from ministers, from boards, from men with more money than she had. In 6 years, every single person who had ever been offered her help had done exactly one of 2 things: taken it or run from it. Not one of them had ever negotiated with her. "Yes," she said. And then, because she had spent 4 months learning the difference between a gift and an operating cost. She took the envelope and added 2 lines under his. The director's position was salaried, and the fund would carry a vehicle because a man cannot sit in 100 kitchens across a county on a bus. Benjamin read it twice. "That's not charity," he said. "That's overhead." "That's what I said." He signed it. It was the back of an envelope in a diner, and it was in every way that ended up mattering the first contract either of them had ever been glad to sign. The surgery was on the 4th of February. The review board, 3 people, one of them. The principal from Bellwood. None of them. Benjamin approved the first grant in 11 minutes. He was not in the room. He waited in the hallway with his hands in his pockets like everybody else. The $9,000 he had borrowed came off the books that spring out of a salary and payments he made himself. 6 months later, on a Saturday in August, Benjamin Brooks was in the kitchen with the window open and a pot on the stove when the doorbell rang. Ethan came down the hall at a run and got there first the way he always did. Then he stopped in the middle of the floor and turned his head. Not the few degrees. Not the old lean but straight, and looked at the door, and then at his father with an expression Benjamin would still be able to see clearly when he was an old man. That was in both, Ethan said. The 1240 Fund opened its second and third grants that fall, and its ninth the following spring. The paperwork lists 2 principles. Nobody who reads the name understands it. 2 families have asked what it stands for and been told both times that it was the cost of a bowl of soup and a grilled cheese, which they took as a joke. On the wall at Ruth's corner, beside the menu board and slightly crooked, there is a small frame with a diner receipt in it, folded soft and white along 2 creases. The 3 of them came out of that door on an evening in September, Ethan going ahead down the sidewalk, explaining something at volume about a parasaurolophus, the adults behind him not quite keeping up. Nobody remembers the card that was declined. Not Dana, who ran it 3 times. Not the 40 people who watched. Not the man near the window who lifted his phone that night, and for whatever reason, never sent the picture anywhere. What remains is smaller and more difficult than the lesson everyone expects, which is that you should not measure a person by their clothes or their bank balance. That part is easy to agree with and easy to forget by morning. The harder part is this: it takes almost nothing to be generous, and it takes real courage to be given to. To let someone hand you something you cannot repay, and stay in the room and say thank you, and not spend the rest of your life trying to get even. $12.40 buys nothing at all today. Tomorrow it might buy a whole life.